Hey guys, Bloody here with another video, and I don't mean to make a long intro. However, the following scary stories, I am going to be taking a different approach by making a much longer video with more detailed stories and actually pictures and stuff that's actually involved with the story. If you guys like these types of videos, leave a comment on what kind of stories you'd like to see me do next. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the U.S. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who decently not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spent the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all that changed just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, sometime between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weekend, with very little traffic and almost no one around. The park, as it was on most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short-sided street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street on my side, there was a silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a walk, but he finished with each stop with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking. He was heading straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to help pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still, but until I could make out his face, his eyes were wide open, and his head was tilted back slightly. Looking off in the sky, his mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. Getting more nervous, I looked my eyes off to him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back, and then he stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing, and he was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. Started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move at first. Once he put half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me, and the street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he was standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure if he was still facing me or not. I had looked away for him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved very fast. I was so shocked, and I stood for some time staring at him, and then he started moving towards me again, with the exaggerated tiptoed steps, as were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone to call someone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the smiling man crept towards me, and then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, looking into the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I mean to ask was, "What do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone, but what came out was a whimper. What? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, he could definitely hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react at all. He just stood there, smiling, and then after what felt like forever, he turned around and very slowly and started dance walking away. Just like that, not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go until he was far enough away. Then I realized something very terrible. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I decided I needed to run too. I ran until I was off the back side of the road and back onto a better lit road with more traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk again. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk, he didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane, and that's what a very, very scary thing to see it was. I've always enjoyed exploring places, mainly abandoned places that has now been forgotten and Mother Nature has consumed it. I've done it for a while now, and I look forward to doing more. However, after this encounter, I'm unsure if I would want to do it again. At my university, I am currently enrolled in a class to pursue my degree in film production. For Halloween, my instructor, Mr. Anderson, had signed a Halloween-themed project. Our project was to simply create a scary story short film. As a result of my imagination, I came up with the idea of filming something that was going to be terrifying in real life, but still real. I wanted to go ghost hunting at a haunted location, catch something scary on the camera, and blow the other films from my fellow students out the water. I didn't want to make anything up, so I decided out of all the places I had explored up to that point, I had zero paranormal activity, but I figured my latest destination could change that. At the edge of town on a giant hill stands a complex of buildings that was once a lunatic asylum. There is no modern feel to its appearance. When you gaze upon the massive stone towers, you feel like you're right in the middle of a horror game. I'll present a little bit of a history, but I'll try not to bore you with numerous details. The asylum was constructed in the late 1800s under the plan created by Thomas Kirkbride. Kirkbride believed that the insane should be offered large rooms, fresh air, and sunshine to cure them from their illness. The asylum was meant to be safe, comfortable, and a comfortable place for the mentally ill, but it eventually became hell on earth for its patients. According to the federal investigators, there were reports of patients breaking out of their rooms and going on rampages and hurting staff members along their way. Suicide was also common there, as some people hung themselves from the ceiling with bed sheets, while others did many other different ways to do the same thing. There was also stories of torture of innocent patients became a normal recognition there, and that place just has a really lot of bad background. With the amount of security swarming the place, it's almost impossible to break in, but the few teenagers who succeeded in doing so have told all kinds of crazy stories, like doors slamming each other, floating heads, glowing eyes, moving wheelchairs, and the occasional scream. One of the hallways in the buildings has been nicknamed the Shadow Hallway because of the shadowy appearances that supposedly roam this hallway. As much as I wanted to explore the place, I didn't want to be an idiot and face charges for trespassing. Luckily, my friend Dennis is the sheriff's son, so I asked him to pull a few strings for me, and it worked. The razor wire gate at the entrance was unlocked for the both of us, and I had the sheriff's note of permission in my pocket in case we were confronted by the security guard that didn't get the memo. Dennis came with me because he partnered up for the project, being a history buff like me. The chance of exploring an abandoned institution over 100 years old was too good of an opportunity to pass up. He researched the history just like I did and printed a copy of the old campus map off the internet so we would know which building was which. We decided to explore the main hospital building first, since it was massive compared to the other buildings. Once we were inside, we were absolutely blown away by the condition of the interior. The inside was in near perfect condition as it was closed yesterday. Thanks to the efforts of the police, no one had a chance to vandalize or spray graffiti on the walls. The ceiling hadn't collapsed, which was a blessing because I didn't want wet pieces of rust to fall on my neck. The only damage we could find was some peeling wallpaper. Everything inside was left behind when the hospital closed, including wheelchairs, beds, syringes, medical equipment, and other things like that. After a half an hour, we found the electroshock therapy room, where many patients met a painful demise, as they were often given high levels of electric current that their bodies could not handle. Dennis pointed at the wall. "Look, dude." I looked at the wall. Attached to the wall were two thick electric cords. Dennis glanced at me and grinned. All the money in the world couldn't convince me to plug my arms into those. "No kidding," I replied. We left the therapy room and started walking down yet another dark hallway. The building was literally like a giant maze. We both saw it at the same time. A giant dark shadow rose out of the floor. Its glowing green eyes flashed like headlights as it stared at us. My hands were shaking with excitement as I pointed my camcorder straight to the thing. It eventually turned its head away from us and sank back into the floor. "Did you get that on camera?" "Please tell me you got that on camera," Dennis shouted. I smiled. "Sure did." Dennis high-fived me. "We're going to ace this project now. Our film will be the best in the class." Right at the moment my camera shut off, I clicked the on and off switch multiple times with no response. "I can't believe this." "What?" "The battery died." This didn't make any sense. "I just charged it right before we left." Dennis shrugged. "Could be the ghost. Plenty of paranormal investigators have reported the exact same thing with their electronics. Plus, we got the ghost on camera, so we're still going to beat the other projects by a landslide, we thought. There's a possibility we still have the whole complex to explore for the night. A dead battery can't stop us." We eventually found ourselves in the ward deed, where the most violent female patients were kept. On each side of the hallway, the patient's room had thick wooden doors and giant brass locks on them. That's when it happened. Without warning, every single door, just in a series of loud bangs, we froze. And then flashes of lights. No misty fog, no stuff like that you see in these cheesy horror movies. And then there was this figure that just appeared out of nowhere. You could definitely tell it was a female and was wearing a simple white hospital gown. Her skin was white as a skeleton, and her eyes had no pupils or no veins, anything like that. They were just empty, white circles. A few wisps of blonde hair struck on her head, with brunette as well, at random angles like strands of a hay of a broom. We thought we heard someone speak. However, we decided to run. We had to run as fast as we can, as we also heard footsteps running towards us. The figure we seen was then nowhere to be seen. However, we did hear many footsteps as we was trying to leave. Then, as soon as we was almost out of the asylum, we heard many steps running behind us. I looked at Dennis and told him to run. After when we talked and showed our professor everything that has happened, he didn't really believe us, but we still got an A on our project. Me and Dennis did go back a few more times, and similar things has happened. I have now posted my story and some of the videos on CreepyPasta.com. So if you guys are interested in seeing that, then you can go look for yourself. I could never sleep well in hotels. I guess that's somewhat of an understatement. I could never sleep well in general, but hotels was the worst. It was just the thought of the previous people of this bed that a complete stranger was in. In my mind, that really messed with me, but that's besides the point. What I'm getting at is how the lack of sleep in hotels changed my life. Christmas We were spending Christmas in a shitty motel and not with family. Great. Don't get me wrong, it's not like I didn't enjoy all you can get buffet of soggy hash browns and gifts for Christmas Eve dinner. Of course, the first snow of the season had to cancel our flight down to Virginia. It was Christmas Eve, and I was trying to sleep in this bleach-saturated room. My mind was wandering what happened in here to cause such an amount of bleach needed. The room was nothing out of the ordinary. 2 beds, one for my dad and for me, and the other for my sister and mom. A bathroom and a stained microwave that looked in need for a good dusting somehow escaped the room and stench of bleach into my dreamless sleep. Waking up, I could tell it was early morning. My dad was next to me, snoring, as he usually wakes up before 4 a.m. That's when it hit me. It's Christmas, and I was about to let this smelly, bad room ruin my favorite holiday. Looking across the bed at the clock to check the time was when I noticed it. The silhouette of a man about 6'3" across the room, staring at my mom asleep, still half asleep and caught up in the moment. I couldn't help but thinking of Santa Claus. I realized how stupid that was later on thinking, and horror soon filled my head. I choked as I knew I couldn't let him see me awake, so I quietly put my head back down, pretending to be asleep. My mind was racing. Someone was in my room, and I couldn't do anything. I was a scrawny 16-year-old. This man looked built like an ox. I wondered if I could wake my dad up in time, but I knew that wouldn't work. He slept like a rock. A bucket of water couldn't even get him up fast enough. I was practically in tears. I'd never felt so helpless. For a second time, I choked back a scream. He was standing next to me, and I could feel and hear his breath on my face. It smelled like he's been eating rotted meat for a week now, with no thought to brush his teeth. If he didn't know I was awake, surely he did now. Seeing my face controlled my fear. The breathing stopped, and I couldn't help the sigh of relief. I would have kicked myself, but there was no need. I heard the room door open and close. I launched out of the bed. Nothing in the room was stolen, and my family was still asleep. And I also thought that it couldn't be a dream. I couldn't have imagined it. Feeling awake as ever, a horrible idea popped into my head. Before I could push it away, I was pulling the door open. Glancing back to the door in order to memorize the room number, I saw the giant spray-painted black X on the door. I had seen this without prior experience. I probably would have thought it was some stupid kids. I knew better, but not enough for what it was meant for. My heart skipped a beat. There he was, turning around the corner at the end of the hall. Why am I doing this? I followed him down to the parking lot. He was now nowhere in sight. One moment he's walking out to the lobby, the next he's gone. Realizing how cold it is outside in paper-thin pajamas, I returned to the lobby. No one was around. Strange. I could swear there's usually a night person working. As I was scared and I was starting to calm down, I realized how stupid and rash my actions has been. He could have killed me. I cursed myself back up to the stairs. I knew something was wrong when I got to my floor. The door to my room was wide open. I hadn't felt it that way, right? I hadn't left it that way, right? I walked inside, and after a quick search of the room, I determined it was safe and my family was still asleep. I locked the door and got back into the bed, though I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I listened to my dad get up, and eventually my mom followed, but I still pretended to be asleep. A few hours passed, and my parents got my sister and I up. We got into the car and made our way back to the airport. Digging through my bag to grab my iPod led to finding something that hasn't been there the previous day. A note simply held the 5 words I still think about this day. I knew you were awake. It's been 2 months since the hotel experience. I'm still scared for my life, and it gets worse every day. The note I found wasn't the only one. I still receive them to this day.